Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second day of Indieway. Well, in today's first session, we will hear Oğuz Konya, professional game development with ECS is going to be discussed by Mr. Konya. He's going to make a workshop. Unity ECS is a more mature, so that's why there will be different maybe actually methods, but any technique can't be used in the context of ECS. Now I'll give the floor to him. Hello, Oğuz, welcome. You can start when you're ready. Hello, everybody. My name is Oğuz Konya. Today I'll talk about how to develop the games in ECS for professionals. Let me talk about myself a little bit first. In 2010, I graduated from the Department of Maths of Yıldız Technical University, and then in Middle East Technical University, I had a master's degree in game technologies, and I have been developing games since then. I have participated into different projects, including traffic simulations and multiply FPS and hyper casual and casual games. Well, these are all different actually game projects that I had the place of last year. It's going to be 1 year this Thursday while I started working in digital games. I am working on a Star Trek Fleet Command game. It is a strategy game. It's not very popular in Turkey. However, it has an audience actually in the global segment. I am well, it is an MMO and it is mobile, so that's why it's not known that much. On last October, I moved to Ireland with my wife and my children. Well, they might intervene in actually to my presentation any minute. My apologies, it is Sunday morning. Well, what am I going to talk about in this workshop? Before I actually made some other presentations, both in Indieway and in some other platforms, one of the actually most common complaint is that the presentations are all about the casual or hyper casual. It's quite natural because this is my experience. And as well, the time limit if this presentations won't allow you to tell much about the other stuff. But today, I will talk about ECS component system. It is a change. I will tell you how to develop a game in this framework, and I am going to use Entitas for that. I'm going to talk about Entitas here. But first, let me talk about what is ECS. It is an architectural, actually, game development pattern. Generally, it is used in video games. It's not used much for the software. It has a composition over inheritance. It actually combines the objects and it is based on the composing over inheritance. It's not that new, but it's not that old though. So GDC has some talks about ECS. And even back then it was not that mature. So we can see some examples. Well, some game developers are also talking about it. So what's that? How does it work? Let me talk about it as a way of work. The Unity itself, we have been using this Unity for a long time, and it is quite similar to ECS. In this unit, you would see some game objects, and on them, there are some components, including transform and mesh renderer, collider, And Unity's own systems work via these actually components. Well, for example, there is a renderer system, and according to the mesh renderer, it makes actually such a transaction. And there is the physical system, and according to the collider component, also it functions. So you can write your own custom-made components. And Entitas is not that different because there are entities within the Entitas, and there is no information on the entities. They only symbolize just an asset, and there are components, and you can write your own components. It's different than the Unity is that while in Unity, you cannot create a game object that cannot transform. It has to have the transform. However, for Entitas or in ECS, there is not such a concept. You can create any component. And your entity is just like a number. It is an identity number. It does not really include any info. Another difference is that for Unity, there are mono behaviors. You can write data within the mono behavior. It can really carry actually information about the game object, including the attack velocity and power. And also it is the case for the functionality. This is within the mono behavior. However, it's not the case for ECS. There are only components and there are data on them. There is no logic that you are supposed to write. Well, I'll go into the details, of course, later. These entities has a certain context. You cannot just create this context blank. There has to be groups. Reuse of the objects as well as another feature, and it is being actually managed in the background. You can maybe create your own groups. On them, there will be maybe only position components or physics components. So these are all separate unique groups that you can create for yourself. However, here you may see there is no functionality or there is no game logic because it works via the systems. A chain of responsibility exists here. So systems just work in order and they only can work on this order. System one works. It might be a physics system, let's say, and there is only physical components on them, and another system as well functions for the mesh renders. And this is the order. And when each game is created, it is repeated. This order is repeated. And here you can see the different systems. One of the systems is called initialize system. When you write start for the mono behavior, ECS and Entitas initialize will do exactly the same thing. It will work just once for start, and then comes execute system, and it's no different. It is just exactly like the update method. The difference is that there's cleanup system. When you execute all this system, their cleanup system as well will work. And also there's a tear down system. The difference from the Unity is that there is also here reactive system. Actually, reactive system does an important job. It's not working over all the components, but it works over all the changing components. Well, you might add maybe a new component on your entity and it is crashing with another entity. Maybe there is this just crash, and then it works just on of them. you might have maybe 10,000 entities, and maybe just 100 of them clashes, and then you just do the actually the process only on the hundreds of them. It's not maybe very clear when I just talk like that. Let me show you a concrete example. I'm going to code it together with you, and you can follow it actually by downloading this link. My time is quite limited. I already spent my 10 minutes. So I will do some stuff, copy and paste. So do not think that I'm skipping these parts. So in this project, I'm tagging everything. You can just follow it via this link. Let me open the Unity, and I am starting a new project. I'm naming it as Entitas. I'm waiting for my MacBook to respond. So I start the project. It is a blank project. I'll go to asset store. Entitas actually was charging before, but now it is for free. Well, there are also the paid actual versions, but when you just write down the Entitas, you will find the unpaid version. I just import it. When you first download it, you have to actually set it up. Entitas, unfortunately, is not documentation is not that good. So you have to find some things yourself, and you can just follow it. GeniZip is the name of the file. This is the root of the project, and I open it. Geni is the code generator of Entitas. Well, you have to generate codes for Entitas to work properly. You need to open the project actually in your editor. Here you see. I'm just opening the folder Entitas. This tool of Entitas will generate some codes for us. Some basic codes will be generated by Entitas. I won't show you all details because these are really not important parts. This is the first part, and it requires a setup. Now we will start writing our own systems. Well, it is a small project. What I am asking is that there is only an object, and we need a standard actually, Unity. You can just write a mono behavior, and you can maybe just write the code to move to right to or to the left side. Well, there are, well, we need to write some systems actually for that. We need to write some codes now. I'm going to write a movement system. But before that, let me open my editor tools. I will import them from somewhere else. I wrote them before these tools. They really enable me to write Entitas codes easily and quickly. I create a component, it's a position component. So as you may see, well, I'd like to inject data in it. And this position component will follow the object. I've told you before, you can make groups. I only would like to create entities that can really move. Well, I won't really add anything, and it's just like a flag. I only have the horizontal component, and if it's well, it will be changed. So I'm just writing a system for that, and this is an execute system. So I'd like to only include objects that are moving. This is what I am looking for. I have the constructor. Well, it doesn't really appear. Okay, I've created my group. Moving objects I have, and let me just write them down. Replace position. I want them to move to the right and to the left. Y and Z, I don't want them to change their position, but I want them to move only on X. My terminal code just helped me to do the code generation. So I just edited the ready-made components, and now I'm accessing to it. And I'm just trying to access to the Y and Z of these positions. So I am writing a system, and it is a horizontal moving system, and it just changes their position and give them a new position. Well, it cannot really work all alone. I need to put them on the stage, and we need a game controller here. Okay, I'm just like writing my systems, private systems. I just say start the systems. And here, I'm adding my horizontal movement system that I just had created. And there are contexts. And all the axes are in the context. And as well, there's a list of the shared instance. I need to pass it to the constructor so that we should just notify on which context that we are working on. We need to initialize all systems. And we need to execute all our systems. We need to make work the cleanups of the systems. And finally, all systems are supposed to be teared down. So what happens next? We have a game controller on the stage. This game controller creates these systems and initialize them, execute them, clean up them. And horizontal movement system will do exactly the same transaction on an entity. However, this entity does not exist yet. We did not create it yet. And I have an initial system. Well, let me do it. I am creating a folder. It's really important to organize different folders. Well, I'll just name it game initialize system. I am creating one entity. Horizontally moving, it is true, and Entitas actually generate them all for me. These are flag components, and it is changing it automatically to the horizontally moving and adding as well the position. And this is like such as adding an position component. Okay. So we need to add the systems, initial systems. Initial system will work now. And it says create an entity. We will create the entity. And we will have a startup position. And all the moving objects will be checked out. And as well, the expositions will be all changed accordingly. Let me come back here and I click on play. You do not see anything on the stage, and it's quite normal. There are only entities here because in Entitas, there are not a game object transform feature. These are all blank entities. However, a good side is that you would see we have a game context. And on this group, it says that you have an entity. It is a horizontally moving component and a position component. And as you see, the position changes like regularly. It goes either to the right side or left side. We do not see anything yet. Let me handle this, and then we can just maybe put a real game object, and we can really create a relationship. Well, I have talked about this copy-paste action of mine already. You can find this actually in the very on the website of Entitas. There is a code. I have prepared it beforehand. I won't go into the details. However, the only thing that it does, we need 3 codes. It is a component that you can put on. Well, it will just create a connection with the entity. It will create a connection, and the mono behavior is for the mono object, and this is the extra. It is for the position changes of the entity, and will change the game position. Let me just do one more thing. Let me add an event. So it just generates an event and sends it. And it will send a message to the game object and will change its position. I'll just generate the code. So here you see one of them are the ones that we have to use for game control. The game event systems. These game event systems, aside the addition compound, each time it changes, there's going to be a new event type, and then I have to be deleted and then add, for instance, who am I going to send it to? Let's create a 3D object here. We don't need these. Game object. This game object view connects it with the entity, just like you will see it in a moment. Let's put it in the resources. We don't need this concept. Okay, so initialize system. Let's go inside. We had created an entity. We had put the compounds on it, and then we're going to be putting this view. Object, instantiate, resources, and load. So now our entity, we're going to be adding a Unity view, which is going to be this, and our game object. So I've instantiated my game object. I've put a sphere on the screen and I've gotten the view of it. And then I wanted to link it with this context. And on this entity, that game object, I've put the reference. So game object entity, they are linked to each other. Going back to the game. Now on the screen, at least we will be able to see certain things when I click on play. Yes, now we've got a sphere. It moves along the screen. And here, this entity is moving. Actually, it moves separately and sphere moves separately. Just like I have mentioned, it has got some visual tools. And when I do the link on this game object, on this game entity, we see what entity it is being connected to. And then here I see the movement of the entity. It has got a component, a list, so on and so forth. Okay, so Entitas, where it shines. Well, actually, it took a lot of time in order to actually show a moving object on the screen. Should we spend that much time? So you may ask, of course not. But the designer comes up to us and says, like, I had done this horizontally, but I want this to be vertical.
and I have misdone this. So if you're developing this with Entitas, you don't change the code. You don't do any change of this code. Instead, you write a new code. For instance, I go and say, let me just have a vertically movement, vertically moving. It is going to move up and down, and I write my own system. I do not change the previous system. That horizontal movement system still continues. And that it won't have any difference from the horizontal movement. First of all, I have to generate a code because I've added a new component, and first of all, I have to generate the necessary component for that new addition. Vertically moving. I'm going to be changing the vertically moving on this system. The code is the same. Let's have not cosinus, but sinus here. And then I go to game visualization assistant. I add vertical movement. I click on play. Of course, we go to game controller. Here it won't operate. We add system. As you see, I do not change the horizontal movement system. I do not exclude it, include it. It still continues operating, but on the entity, as there is no horizontal movement, it's not going to horizontally move that entity. It is only going to move it up and down. And now you see that. So the designer comes up and says, for instance, I've done a wrong work here. I wanted both that previous system and this system to operate. This is not like a seldomly encountered issue, by the way. Supposing that you do a game and you've got a car system, and then you write a system, and then you have a plane system, and then the two codes do not match each other, and the game designer says, I want a flying car, for instance. You have to write a flying car, but with Entitas, you don't have to do that. All you have to do is to operate the two systems together. Let's do that. So let's operate the two systems. Both horizontal moving and vertical moving. So the result that you achieve may not be the result that you want, that you desire. However, the two systems, without doing any code change, you can operate the two. Here you see it rotates up and down, left side and right to the right side also. X cosinus and Y sinus. This is the definition of a circle. So this operates vertically, and thanks to the tools of Entitas, here you see horizontal moving, vertical moving. If I want visually, I can make necessary change is on the screen. What horizontal movement component, if I remove it on this entity, here as you see, it is only moving upwards and downwards. There is no left and right movements. If I like, I can also remove vertical movement as well. It would just stay still in the middle of the scene. But here we see that the systems are functioning here. If I like, I can re-add these components back so that it continues moving in the direction that I want. Here I can change my position, as you see. And Entitas, one of the most important advantages is this. I had mentioned one of the best features of Entitas is the reactive system. So now let's show a reactive system, which is, as a developer, you want to write the position of these objects on the console. So let's write a login system and let this be a reactive system. And once it is added to the component, so that this shows the position on the console. Reactive system. I had mentioned most of the coding, they come ready-made. So there is this trigger to this reactive system, because when a component is added or else deleted, when it is going to add something, react to something specific. And here it shows what it reacts to. Context. Game entity. Game matcher. I've created a group. And when the component is added, it is going to populate it. I don't need this part. Reacting systems, when they are triggered, you may need to filter those entities. For instance, I add this position on this entity. If a system position is removed, I need this position, and I filter this. Okay, I say, let this position on that entity. I mean, just give me the entities which have got position on them. Debug log position. When I write the position, I am sure that I don't have to do an null check here, and I don't have to check whether it has got a component here or not. Let's add this system here also. When we hit the play button, each time it changes the position. This is not the executive system, by the way, even though it's like in each frame seems like the executive system. Let me just show you this. For instance, supposing that these horizontal moving components, vertical moving components, if we remove them, nothing will be on the screens because the position component is not added to this entity. So that's why it doesn't react to anything. These systems, we see that they are operating actively. This was the code bit. Hopefully it was not complicated. Going back to the presentation, the advantages and disadvantages. What are the advantages? First of all, Entitas actually single responsibility, open close principles. If you write your code properly, it complies with them already by default. And also, the systems that we create, they are reusable. For instance, when I write a vertical movement system, I can use it in another game, in another project, or as horizontal movement system, or as the moving system without changing it a bit, because the systems here, as you see, you write in such a way that, I mean, they're independent from any other thing. They're only related to entity, or else like that horizontal moving, it is related to the position system, position components. Together with the position components, you can put it in another system, in another game, and operate it accordingly. And not only for other projects. For instance, if you do a multiple player game, and if this code has to function on the server, you don't have to write a separate code for the server. You get all these codes put on the server. All what you have to do is to remove the entity links, and your code works without muting. Because heuristic supports They are related to each other with events. You don't have to do any change in your code, and you can have it involved in another project. And execution orders. They are executed in a certain row, in order. Here you see there is a certain order to these systems. This is how they operate. I am 100% sure. Just like in Unity, I do not like mind which one is triggered first, callback, this and that. I don't have such concerns. When I follow it from here, for instance, as an example, there is this initial system and input systems. First of all, the inputs will operate, and then based on these inputs, the game system is going to operate, and then we can check whether that level is completed, and on top of it, we can check whether the game is finished or not, because I'm sure 100% that they're going to operate. And also memory efficient entities, as I said, reactive systems, they only work on triggers that you define. They do not operate on objects. That's why memory efficient, it doesn't load that much, and the performance is really high. And while doing a project, there are some visual debugging tools. When a game is played, you can turn on and turn off the systems, you can remove and add components. And if you've got a designer for this, the designer can also be doing this. One of the most important features of Entitas, it is data-driven. And one of the best aspects of data-driven development is that they are not related to engineers, like add and remove the components, so we could say. However, of course, besides this advantages, it has got some disadvantages also. The initial setup is too long, as you see, because when I was explaining, I got a bit bored, to tell you the truth. I mean, the first initial setup, after downloading the setup there, takes a little bit of time, and it's a bit complicated. Some things, yes, it run smoothly, but it is not always the case. For instance, before explaining you this project, I tried it 3 times from scratch. And in the first 2, I had tiny little problems. You know, I had to delete the project and reload it and generate certain things, certain codes I had to reoperate, so on and so forth. On the other hand, the ECS concept, Entity Component System, it is not something which is easily grasped, especially if you have received computer engineering training or as programming training. And if you're trying this system, comprehending this is not easy, because you always think like a car functionality, for instance. If you want to write car, the variables and the functionality, you write it inside, and in your mind, you've got this car object, car class. But this system does not operate like that. I mean, you have to have a drivetrain system, an engine system, a rail system, and all the different components that make up a car. The systems to operate those components, you have to set it up in your mind and write them. This is not something, it is difficult for you to internalize it and comprehend it. I mean, the first reaction that you give is not this. I mean, no matter how much you internalize within your head. For instance, I've been working on the system for many years, but still, like, shall I put it in mono behavior and operate it first comes to my mind, but that is not the case. And projects can get quite complex really swiftly. I had shown you these systems here. These are exemplary systems, but I've actually written these examples by taking into account another game. This is only 1 to the 10th of those systems. This is a really long list. And this game is a casual game. I mean, I cannot even imagine as to how the list would be like in more complex games. I mean, in Entitas, actually, there is this system grouping feature. I can just group these systems, this input system. I could just get them and I could create an input systems and put it inside. However, still this is makes it whole thing complicated. Entitas generates codes. The more you write it, the more code you generate. And then for adding and removing those components on those entities, Entitas does it automatically for you. But the problem is that if you are working as 2 developers or as 3 developers, you number it. And if you're working on similar things, and if you've used similar component names, when you generate it, you have got a code, he has got a code. It all makes a complexity, and projects could get mixed up. A code generation, I don't like it at all when it comes to collaboration. It might trigger problems, but with certain disciplines, when working with others, you can come over this. And finally, even though I tell that there are visual debugging tools, visually you can debug things, you can see it on the screen. If there is an error, if we see certain errors like mar reference exception, for instance, if we start receiving this error, debugging is not easy. You will see that because this system where the problem stems from is not the actual problem where the system that this problem stems from. Like you add a component on an entity and then it is removed. Your system may not be problematic, but another system might be, and it would be really difficult for you to find that. Unfortunately, there is nothing that I can do about it. Debugging is one of another disadvantages. Aspects. This was all from me. I hope that it was beneficial. Yes, it sounds a bit complex. It's highly technical, I know it. But as I said, there is a project, an example project. You can download it and you can go through it. Entitas has got its own unique examples. Entitas website, its own website is a bit poor. The documentation is a bit complicated. I mean, some used to support the website, but they have left this and that. So still some documents show the old systems. It may be difficult for you to navigate yourself through the website. However, some certain concepts you can find out on their website as well. I will be receiving your questions. If the questions are too long, you can get in touch with me via the links that you should see on the screen. But if you add me on LinkedIn, and many people do so, especially university friends, please, either you write on your profile that you are involved in gaming and you want to develop yourself, or else PC application. I want to know that you actually want to do something for the industry, because random people actually add me also, and I want you to differentiate you from them. And that is how I can do that is by seeing actually that you're interested in game development, so that I do not ignore you. Now, questions. Well, Mr. Oğuz, thank you so very much for this workshop. Well, currently we don't seem to have any questions on the Q&A menu. Well, actually our time is about to end. If you like, we can end the session. Thank you so very much for your participation. I thank you indeed. Hope to see you next time. Yeah, hope to see you.